We've been doing podcasts for just over a year now, and we appreciate all of the support that we've been getting for it and how much people have been able to benefit from the utilization of the techniques that we have laid out and the perspectives, the understandings. It's really satisfying and very fulfilling to hear back the changes that people are encountering and how much easier learning and becoming successful has gotten for people. So thank you for your participation. Today we want to report on some research that was done on a technique that we laid out close to a year ago in our segment on how to enhance memory. We talked about working with a memory palace, a technique that involves associating items to be remembered with location in space. So we could imagine walking down the street and, with the house on the right, we remember a particular formula, and the tree on the left we associate with the next thing we're going to remember, and so on. The way that we understand that technique to work is that the part of our brain that was evolved to remember places, because early in our evolution, where something was located was all important. Where do we find the tubers growing that we need for our family? Where do we go to hunt? Where do we go to find water? If we're a tribe that's roaming around, we want to know when we come back to an area, where do we find the essential items? So that area of the brain is very important, and in its evolution became a large segment of the brain. And it's a different aspect of the brain than we typically use to remember items. So we went through the whole process of how to do that. And you can check back on that particular podcast, and we think you'll find it very helpful. But what we want to report today is the recent research that just came out in March, studying this particular technique and what it does for people. We know that there are some people that have super memories, and some of them compete in memory contests and can remember hundreds of items on one exposure and that sort of thing. The question being, can we train other people to do that? And that's what we suggested in that earlier podcast. Well, now the research is in, and in fact, yes, we can. This was reported in Neuron on March 8th. After just 40 days of 30-minute training sessions each day, we saw that individuals' typical memory skills at the beginning, these are people that had no prior training, anything that way, could recall an average of 26 words from a list of 72. After going through this training for those 40 days, they were then able to remember 62 of these words. This is just 4 months later. In the experiments that were done, the change in people's capacity obviously was substantial, but they also were able to show that they maintained that after they had done that training, that literally that built in a capacity. So then the researchers went further and they did brain scans with people going through the process pre and post. And yes, they did find that there were changes, in significant and beneficial changes in the part of the brain that afforded people this type of memory. Well, that's amazing. That really confirms that one of these things that we have been sharing with you has experimental validation. Now, a lot of these do, and all of them we have used clinically for decades and shown that they are very effective. But it's always nice when we see that the researchers are beginning to catch up with us. We think that's just amazing and very confirming. Just so you have a little more information about that, the leading author on this study, Martin Dressler, who's an assistant professor of cognitive neuroscience at Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands, he was one to say not only can you induce behavioral changes, but the training also induces similar brain connectivity patterns as those seen in memory athletes. Working in the same lab there in the Netherlands is a guy that was one of the top 10 memory champions in the world. He was able to memorize about 500 pieces of data in 5 minutes. In other related studies that they've done, they checked with functional MRI the brains of 23 people that had not done any memory training and 23 that had done substantial memory training. Initially, they thought they would see maybe an increase in size in particular areas of the brain. Instead, what they found was there were much greater levels of connectivity throughout the brain, and that those patterns of connectivity spread across 2,500 different connections in the brain. And a subset of 25 connections most strongly differentiated the memory athletes from those with typical memory skills. Again, interestingly, none of these memory athletes were born with exceptional memories. They all developed those over time using the kinds of techniques that we have made available here. Of course, that says you can do that also. This is not some superhero feat. This is just something that comes from working out in these ways. In the same way, if you want to get stronger, you work out at the gym. If you want to develop a better memory, you work out your brain. When these researchers looked further into those 25 areas of greatest connection, they found that these hubs of connectivity were primarily engaged in 2 regions of the brain. One of them is the medial prefrontal cortex, which is known to be active when individuals relate new knowledge to knowledge that they've already had. The other area is the right dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, and that is known to be involved in efforts to learn strategically. Now, for most of you, the area of the brain involved isn't going to be all that interesting. What we want to point out is that through all of our podcasts, we've been talking about developing the interconnection between various parts of the brain. If we go back to some of the work that we related to you about how to increase intelligence, the image streaming work that we did a whole podcast around, that was a method for increasing the connectivity between various parts of the brain, and the result of that was increased intelligence. Now, for those of you that haven't listened to that podcast, you might go back and review that, because that information has been extremely helpful to a lot of people over the years. And we've seen in research increases on IQs of 20 to 40 points, which is almost unheard of, except it can be demonstrated. So this research that came out, we're very excited by, and we just wanted to share it with you so that you, again, understand that there is a basis for everything that we're doing, and that if it is utilized, if you utilize it, it will change your brain, it will change your experience, it will enhance your ability to learn, and hence increase your ability to be successful.